All right, hi everybody. Welcome. We're going to go ahead and get started. Um, ooh, all right, great. Thanks everybody for being here. My name is Anna Weber. I'm the chair of the Student Affairs Committee for SCBNA. Um, Welcome to our latest webinar in this series that we're doing. I'm just going to start off before we get to our wonderful speaker for the day. I'm just going to give a little bit of an overview of our organization and what we do. And then at that point, I will turn it over to Deanna. So SCBNA, for anyone who's not familiar with our organization, we're Society for Conservation Biology North America. We are one of the regions that are part of the global Society for Conservation Biology organization, but each region kind of operates independently. So SCB North America, our vision for ourselves is that we're a professional society focused on the conservation of biodiversity, healthy ecosystems, and human connections. And our mission is to provide a venue to connect diverse students and professionals to advance and apply conservation knowledge, and to welcome, support, and empower all voices engaged in conservation to contribute to equitable solutions and catalyze wonder for the natural world. So what all that means is that we are a big and diverse kind of Big Ten organization. We really are welcoming to anyone who's involved in conservation or cares about conservation in any way. So we have a lot of biologists, and we also have social scientists, and we have people who work in economics. So we have all kinds of fields represented, nonprofits, um, federal and state agency employees, academics, etc. So anybody who's even kind of tangentially involved with conservation is welcome. So our members have access to, through SCBNA specifically, through the professional development opportunities like this webinar, for example, and also our biennial conferences, which our next one is in 2026, which will be held in Milwaukee. And then the global organization also produces several academic journals and publications that members have discounted access to and discounted, I think, publication fees. So if you're interested in learning more about SCBNA or you think you may want to join, feel free to go ahead and scan the QR code. It just goes to our website. So this specifically is being hosted by the SCBNA Student Affairs Committee, as I mentioned earlier, I'm the chair. Um, so our subcommittee's role is to essentially to provide resources for students and early career folks in the conservation field. So we do this by organizing various activities and events just to try to provide support and professional development and networking opportunities. So we do technical skill building workshops, mostly which are online, um, and career development opportunities via panel discussions. And then we also host social and networking events, but those are more so things that happen at our in-person conferences. Um, so if you're interested in being involved in any of the programming for students, my email is there at the bottom of the screen, and I will probably also put it in the chat. So just feel free to get in touch. We have quite a few committee members, but we're always welcoming more people. So let me know if you want to be involved. So this is, I think, getting close to maybe this is the second to last of our winter webinar series. We've done 3 series starting in the fall. So our first was grant writing and job applications, which is now completed. And this is getting towards the end of our winter seminar series, which was focused on professional networking and career development. The next one we have after this one is on undergraduate coursework and internships for a career in conservation. So this is panel discussion and presentations that are just advice and tips for undergraduates who are interested in being involved in this field, and that's on April 3rd. So once those are done, we'll have another webinar series starting in the spring, which will be focused more on building skills, research skills, so data analysis, and technical skill building. So now I'm going to introduce our webinar speaker for the day. We have Deanna Burrell. She's the development director of the Idaho Conservation League, and she's going to talk to us about her experience fundraising for nonprofits and conservation. It should be a really great seminar. And then we'll have plenty of time for Q&A at the end of the session. There will also be a post-event survey, which I think Bernie, our Director of Operations, Bernie Travisari, is going to send an email about, or you can scan this QR code now, which will also take you to it. All right. And now I'll turn it over to Deanna.
Well, thank you so much, Anna. It's so nice to be here. Bernie, thank you for inviting me. I really am excited about today. I get a little bit passionate about this, so I'll try to keep to the time limit and be sure we have time for questions at the end and a deeper dive on any topics if you want. This is an introductory level, so if some of you are beyond that, bear with me and let's chat a little bit more at the end of the session. So I'm going to share a screen. All right, I think it's working. Okay, good. I always wonder, you know. I am Deanna. I do live in beautiful Boise, Idaho, and I work for the Idaho Conservation League. We are a statewide organization and Idaho's leading voice for conservation. For 52 years now, we have been working very hard to protect the air you breathe, the water you drink, and the public lands and wildlife that you love. And I am coming to you, like I said, from our headquarters in Boise. And this Boise Valley is the ancestral, cultural, and unceded territory of the Shoshone, Bannock, and Northern Paiute people. We recreate, work on, and respect the lands of the Nez Perce, Coeur d'Alene, Kootenai, Kalispel, and other affiliated brands and tribes. And we honor with great gratitude the land itself and the traditional stewardship of this land by the Indigenous people that continues today. Briefly, a little background on me so you have some context to where I'm coming from. I have been in the nonprofit world for, I hate to say this, a little over a decade now. Most of it has been in fundraising for various nonprofits. I've worked for a science center, I have worked for a women's and children's shelter, and then most recently here at the Idaho Conservation League. Before that, I worked as a financial planner, and I'm a certified financial planner. So for about, gosh, I hate to say this out loud, for about 30 some years now, I've been gathering assets just for different causes. Sometimes it's helping people recognize what they need for retirement. More recently, it's been recognizing people for how they can contribute to the quality of life for themselves and for those around them. So I want to start talking about some fundraising myths that a lot of us hear. One thing that's very popular, and actually an article came up just before this meeting about overhead. So there's been this mood for decades in the nonprofit sector that overhead is bad. Overhead isn't bad. Overhead's you. Overhead's staff. Overhead's the computer you use to do your work. Overhead's the boots you wear to go out into the field. It's the equipment you use. That is not bad. Generally, nonprofits try to keep those that overhead or admin costs to 20 to 30% of budget. But there was a time not too long ago where it was really encouraged to be just 10% of budget. So it's really hard. And it ended up where a lot of nonprofits would really just kind of do a shell game with their finances and not be incredibly transparent about their overhead. Fortunately, that is shifting. And if any of you subscribe to Nonprofit Pro, I encourage you to do so. If you don't, it's free. They just had an article talking about overhead and how actually that's a great way to have transparent conversations with donors about, yes, it may cost us $20,000 to do this project, but by the time we figure in the equipment and the staff we need, it's actually $25,000. So can you help us meet that goal? Instead of asking for the amount that doesn't include the overhead, which I thought was a brilliant idea. I do want to say this can also be kind of a tricky conversation with donors. Just last year, we had a donor who sent us a very generous donation for our salmon restoration work. We're working very hard in Idaho to bring harvestable and healthy populations of salmon back to the state because they've been decimated. And we're working with Washington and Oregon on that too. And we had this donor who's like, yes, I completely support you taking out the 4 dams that are blocking this, but you can't pay any staff. Like, well, so that became a really interesting educational opportunity with the donors. Like, we have to have staff to actually be able to do that. So it's not bad. It's part of our life. And the more we can talk about it and shine a light on it, the easier it is to have that conversation. Another big myth in fundraising is that somehow donors just know we're grateful. They don't. And thanking them is so important. And there's a saying within fundraising, thank before you bank. So you get a donation, thank them before you process that donation. Make sure you're saying thank you and thank often, and not just for that gift. We try here at ICL to we thank somebody, we get the gift in, and then 3 months later, we'll have some sort of check-in. And then with our regular communications, we're always thanking our financial supporters. So our e-news, our printed newsletter, all of that. And one of the tricks is also to make the donor the hero of your thank you. Like you made this possible, not we did this, but you made it possible. And that really resonates. Another myth is that, behind a slide there, sorry, is that all donors give for altruistic reasons. It's not entirely true. As much as we would love that to be true, it's not always true. Um, some people give because they want something really cool to talk about at a cocktail party. We just had that conversation with one of our donors. Like, I appreciate your work on climate. That's not really sexy right now. I wanted something I can really brag about at a cocktail party. So we shifted him to focusing on our youth salmon protectors, which is the youth program we have. So we still get the funding. We're still on mission. He gets to brag about something at a cocktail party. Sometimes it leaves kind of a bad taste in your mouth, but it ended up being a win-win situation. So just kind of be aware of that. And often people give for very personal reasons, a really personal connection to your mission. We have one donor, for example, who grew up along the Cuyahoga River. And I don't know if you all recall that the Cuyahoga River used to catch on fire all the time just outside of Cleveland because it was so polluted. So clean water is really, really important to him. So that's a really personal mission. And it's not entirely altruistic. It's just he has seen how bad pollution can be in waterways. Another myth is that you can never fire a donor or a volunteer. You absolutely can. And you can, what was that term a few years ago? You can quiet quit one, or you can just flat out say this isn't a match. An example is we had a donor who was in our major donor category who really was incensed that we used pronouns on our email signatures. And we just kind of let him go. That wasn't something that fit in with our core values. So we just kind of let that go. And I think that's important to realize. Sometimes with smaller organizations that realistically is harder to do because the finances really can make a big impact. But it's something to think about. If there's a donor that just isn't a good fit, it's okay to say this isn't a good fit anymore and just let them go. And I'll talk about an attitude of abundance a little bit later, but that's part of that attitude. It's like, it's okay if this person isn't a good fit for us. And the last myth I want to talk about is that board members are terrible fundraisers. And every board member will tell you this. I can't raise money. I'm not a good fundraiser. It's not true. They are your most passionate ambassadors. And even if they're not asking for money, just having them tell the story of why they invest their time in your organization is just a great way to help them raise money. So I wanted to get some of those myths out of the way. And we'll talk too about what makes a successful fundraising professional. So as I've been in my career mentoring some younger folks coming into the business, like, what's the silver bullet? What's that one thing you can do? There isn't. I'm sorry. There's not just one thing. It's a process. And there's a lot of different things you can do. But what helps you build that process and build that basis is to have really strong messaging. Be really clear with how you're talking about, how your organization is talking about their mission. For example, right now, public lands is a really big concern in Idaho. So I'm going to be leaning a little more towards public land examples. But we always say, keep public lands in public hands. And anytime we are like out on vacation and we have our out of office line on our emails, like, we're out enjoying your public lands or our public lands. Like, that's a really clear message we have all of the time. And that really helps. So there will be things within your organization that will be very strong and very clear, and just keep that consistency, because there are, right, no silver bullet, but there are two rules to keep in mind too. There's a rule of 27, which is people generally need to hear something 27 times before it really sinks in with them. And that's a lot. So that's why that messaging in your emails, on your out of office, in your conversations, in your e-news, all of those things is really important. And then also there's the rule of 7 for your larger donors. And that rule of 7 is there are 7 personal touch points before someone will increase a gift to you or give you a large gift. And that held true when I was in financial planning and working with high net worth donors, or excuse me, high net worth investors. And it holds true with high net worth donors now. So not a silver bullet, but a good point to remember. Relationships are key. Make it personal. Um, you really want to connect people with your mission, really make that connection, find out what motivates them, ask them why they support your group, ask them what they care about. Um, and you're not asking them to necessarily make a donation, but you're giving them an opportunity to invest in your mission and a future they want to see. So especially when we talk about, again, I'm leaning on public lands a lot because it's such a hot topic right now. We talk about public lands. It's like investing for the future of their children to be able to enjoy the public lands that we have, as an example for that. You also want to be sure that you educate and inspire people before you make the ask. You just don't want to start the conversation with, we do this great work, please send money. It's like, we do this great work. This is why it matters. This is how it impacts you. This is how it impacts other people. This is what we're going to do in the future and how it'll impact future generations before you make the ask. But then don't forget to make the ask. Shortly after I started at one of my previous organizations, a gentleman called me and he said, "Oh, I see all these people at this higher level giving your annual report. How come you've never asked me to give at that level before?" It's like, "Oh, I don't know. Why didn't we? We should have." So, like, remember to make the ask. Some people will say, "Okay, I get it. I'll give you some money." But most people want to be asked to invest in your cause. There's also, I think, and I really hate this phrase when I say it, especially now, there is this challenge to balance urgency with hope. There are a lot of concerns in the environmental sector about how the current administration is going to treat climate change and public lands and, well, everything, right? EPA is going away, all these things that we care so much about. And that's really urgent and that's really can be really dark and heavy, but you have to balance that with hope or people get burned out. Your donors will just get burned out and potential donors just really get turned off by that. So we had, again, as an example, the election happens to be right during end of year giving season, which is the last 2 months of the calendar year, usually the heaviest giving season for almost all nonprofits. And the timing was such, nobody knew what the election was going to be when we had to get our letters ready to go. So we said that. So there's a bit of transparency there. It's like, we don't know what's going to happen in the election and we don't know how it's going to affect our future, but we are going to be here and here are the things we are always going to work on for you. And that worked really well. So that's one of the ways that we found balance. And so finding that balance across the board is super important. This may surprise some people, but direct mail is still alive and well. Not to rule out or diminish in any way the digital solicitations, like through emails, even Facebook to a degree. But I will say, given our experience and those of colleagues I've talked to in other parts of the country too, email solicitations will bring in 1% of what a mail solicitation will. So don't rule those out. Don't think it's dead, especially when you think about the boomer generation still is the wealthiest generation we have. And they're the folks who are looking forward to what their grandchildren and sometimes great grandchildren are going to inherit when it comes to the environment. And they respond to paper a lot more than they respond to email. So keep that in mind too. And then, be creative and have some fun. There's a tendency to get really serious in fundraising language, and that kind of goes back to some of that gloom and doom language, but have some fun with it. We are resurrecting a little cartoon character that was a badger that ICL used in the 1980s. And he would badger people to become members on our printed materials. And it would be this adorable badger. He's got like a three-piece suit, a little ICL logo on his lapel and all this stuff. And he's like, reason number 53, you should be a member of ICL. Reason number 283, you should be a member of ICL. And they're a little quirky and a little fun. And people loved it. And we brought them back a couple times just to test them, which is something you need to do quite a bit with audiences, is to test. And people are loving him because he's a little bit sassy and he's a little bit fun. So, think about that and don't just think about, oh my gosh, I have to ask somebody to give me $25,000 and this need to be really hard. You need to have just a little bit of creativity and fun with that too. Connecting people to mission is the best thing you can do. So you want to be a really good storyteller, not just in outgoing materials, but every time you have a conversation. And we like to say here too, like, let the land tell the story, let your mission tell the story. We actually have totally maxed out some events we have, events, they're outings in the next couple of weeks where we're going out to a sage grouse lek to watch the mating season. And like we have to leave Boise at 4 in the morning to get out to this lek. And people are so excited about that. And that experience is going to tell them more about what we do than I can in a newsletter. So find a way to tell that story, not just verbally, but actually by getting people in the experience. Statistics are okay to use if they tell a story. I love my program team here. They are brilliant, and they will talk about NEPA and TMDLs, and TMDL should be at this level and not that level, and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't mean anything to a person reading that. Like they don't know what a total maximum daily limit is or why that particular thing is important. What we need to say is this is what excessive amounts of phosphorus in a lake that is warming does to the environment and how this impacts. So use the statistics, but use them in a really smart way to tell that story and try to avoid the acronyms. We often have webinars for our major donors, and it's one staff person's job to be in chat deciphering all of the acronyms in the chat so that the donors understand what those acronyms that are being used mean. So just be aware that it may mean a lot to you, but it probably doesn't mean a lot to somebody else. And then also to connect people to your mission, you have to be really good at the humble brag. You have to be able to say, yes, we are succeeding here. You are making that possible for us. So share that wins, and share the wins along the way. We a lot of what we do, right, is generational work in the environmental field. One thing that an example I use for ICL quite a bit is we spent 30 years getting a wilderness designation. And that's hard sometimes to keep donors engaged with that work. So we had to share the wins along the way. And the win in this case was a certain senator was on our side now and then really saw the beauty in that. So like share those wins and keep talking about how the successes are coming, but how the successes need to keep continuing. Missionize everything, every event, every outing, every call, every meeting. Tie it directly back to your mission. That has to be such an important part to keep people super connected to you. Otherwise, they will drift. And then know your audience. Know your audience's demographics, what their interests are, their capacity to donate time, talent, or treasure. I don't know if you've heard those 3 T's of fundraising. People can donate time, talent, and treasure. Sometimes they have more time than treasure, and sometimes they have more treasure than time. And that's okay. Just kind of meet them where they are. We consider our volunteers who may not give us money actually donors as well, because time is such a valuable thing for them to give us. And if you have a way to segment based on interest or geography, so I'm sure you all can picture Idaho in your mind. We actually have 2 time zones in our state. So we've got the panhandle that's very different. I call it the skinny part of the state. It's very different than the fat part of the state. So when we talk to the skinny part of the state, that is a rainforest up there. It's not high sage steppe desert like the rest of Idaho. I'm not raising my hand. I just talk with my hand. So sorry about that. So we've segmented our communications, and that has made a huge difference in our response rate from those different segments. And then you want to use a CRM. Spreadsheets are fine, but you want a good CRM that can help you segment this, because that'll end up working for you and making life so much better for you. All right, let's quickly talk about events. There's this great article that you can Google that was written in 2016 that says, first, kill all the galas. But they're still happening. They're still a big thing. A lot of people have galas, which is fine. Just go in knowing they're incredibly time consuming, and they often have a very low ROI. So you want to be sure you focus on the message and have a program. The best kind of gala I've participated in wasn't even actually a gala. We shifted it to a breakfast, and it was an hour long, and we would raise $500,000 at this breakfast. No alcohol. So it was really cheap. Um, Pre-plated quiche on a plate. Like it was really inexpensive, but it was nice and it was very highly scripted and it worked great. I think that's a good takeaway. And that what made that work really well too, and what makes our ICL's combination conference gala is the relationships are key. And I'm going to say this a bunch, relationships are key. So it's about getting the right people in the room for you. And the right people can mean the large donors, but also often means the connectors, the people who know people, the people who will bring their friends, the people who you're big ambassadors that will get other people in the room to engage them with your mission. Again, you also want to educate and inspire before the ask. You hardly ever do you want a cold invitation going out to somebody to come to an event that's a fundraising event. You want to be sure you have connected with them somehow so they understand your mission and they're inclined to come for that versus the silent auction that they know they're going to get a super big deal at, that they're really coming to see you. So really work those relationships. And then also, I mentioned before, just you really have to watch the ROI. They can get really expensive quickly. It's a good opportunity to think about sponsorships, underwriters, those sorts of things to help just cover the cost of the venue and the meal so that anything above any other money you raise is just really coming into revenue to support your programs. Okay, I'm going to talk about grants a little bit. I put a link in here that I'll have to share separately because this is a video that literally uses a pizza shop as an example to how funders treated. I don't know if Bernie, you're kind of smiling. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's about a 6-7 minute video, so I'm not going to play it, but I will share the link. It's a little sad, happy. It's a poignant story about how people often think of nonprofits, especially grantors. Oops, wow, right ahead there. So multi-year operational grants are gold and kind of good luck. There aren't a lot of those out there, but when you find one, you really need to nurture that relationship. They're really strong and tend to be incredibly reliable. It takes as much time and energy to write a $5,000 grant as a $50,000 grant. So don't be shy of going after those $50,000 grants. You need a balance of both because if you lose a $50,000 grant, say in a following year, that's a pretty big hit versus a $5,000 grant. But you need to find that balance, knowing like I'd rather have a bunch of $50,000 grants than a bunch of $5,000 grants because it's going to take the same amount of time. Have a strong case statement, and this works for donors as well. And the case statement is a strong written summary of what you do, why you do it, and what it costs to do what you do. And that you kind of use as the base and you copy and paste into other grants out of that, and it will save so much time. And grants are mostly about relationships. So some of grants, especially the smaller ones, you'll have an online portal. You never know who's on the other side of that, and you fill out the grant and you hope for the best. The larger grants will have grant managers or program officers. They have different titles for them, but building a relationship with them is really important. And I'll give you a quick example. We have a longtime funder. They've been wonderful. And we have known and worked with this particular grant manager for 8 years. And at the end of our fiscal year last year, they were like, hey, we've got a little extra money. How about we send you an extra $150,000? Are you okay with that? I'm like, well, sure, we're okay with that. And that was all because of the relationship we had with this person. So we stewarded her like we stewarded an individual donor. So we was sure she got our email that she wanted. She got our executive director does a quarterly update. She got our print newsletter. When something big happened that affected the work that they were funding, we were sure she got a special email or a phone call or something like that. So that worked really well. I was really excited about that. So let's talk about sustainable and resilient funding, because that's what drives the organization. Otherwise, you kind of feel like you're in a hamster wheel. Like you've got to get the sustainable and resilient process going. So those multi-year grantors, building the relationships with the individuals. And we talk about fundraising often as a 3-legged stool. It can also be a 4-legged stool. The 3 legs generally are a source of grants, the source of individual donors, and then earned income. Now, understanding the environmental world, earned income is a little bit more challenging than, say, a science center or something like that, or a museum. So, where the earned income or where like a constant revenue flow can come from is from an endowment. So, we have an endowment that we are able to pull about $150,000 a year off of. So we can build that in our budget. That just really helps even out the budget, and it's really important to us to do that. If the organization isn't of a size where they have an endowment like that or have the earned income, then another really important and stabilizing kind of leg to that stool would be monthly giving. And I think monthly giving is important no matter what. But monthly givers are significantly more loyal than other givers. They'll sign up on a credit card. If you can get it to sign up on their checking account, that's even better because that doesn't ever expire. And it's great for predicting income. It's great for cash flow. It's great for loyalty. It's great to treat them a little bit more special because they're doing something really special because they are giving to you every month to think about, to encourage your mission and work with you through that mission. Let's see, unrestricted gifts. It's really tempting for organizations, and you would probably get this more from your board than people in the organization, to kind of chase a grant for the new shiny object. It's like, well, we really, I'll narrow this down. It's like, we really focus on salmon recovery, but someone wants to work with us on recovering a sort of a type of frog somewhere. It's like, well, that's not really our mission. We don't have the ability to do that. We don't have the talent to do that. So we're not going to do that. So we want to stick to mission, but the more general funding you can get, the better, because then you can spend it however you need it the most, if that makes sense. And then planned gifts, that's what we call our bequests. So if somebody leaves us something in a will, or they set up a charitable remainder trust, there's a lot of really complicated ways to do that. But that is a really wonderful gift to your organization's future. So I have people who have put us in their will. ICL will not see that money in my lifetime, right? That bequest will come probably 50 years from now. And that's great. We love that. And we want to steward those people as though it's a current gift. But that just really helps with the longevity of the organization as well. And then I mentioned briefly before having an endowment. So endowments make sense when you're at a certain level of operating budget and a certain level of kind of reliable incoming revenue from your donors or grants. And that really, there are two types. There's a donor directed and a board directed. The board directed endowment has a lot of flexibility to it. And we can, if people have questions about that, I'm happy to get into it more in the Q&A. But those are great. Like I said, right now we have about $4.5 million in our endowment, and we're pulling $150,000 a year off of that. So that's a really great tool for us. And that's not touching the principal at all. Like, that's just off the interest. And then I do want to say this, kind of for selfish reasons. You need to be a sustainable and resilient you as the fundraiser. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Like, it takes time to build relationships. It takes time to build the trust. It takes time to connect people with mission. So I've seen some people come in and in 6 months they're like, wow, this isn't what I thought. I haven't raised nearly the money I thought. I'm out. It's like, please know that this takes a long time. And also it helps if you have a culture of philanthropy within your organization. The executive director and the board chair have to be involved in that. And what I mean by that is everybody understands they have some role in the fundraising. So I'm really fortunate here at ICL. Our program staff is super eager to go on donor meetings with me. I'm not asking them to ask for money. I'm asking them to come tell their story. They're the experts. People would much rather hear from our public lands director about public lands than me trying to take his 23 years worth of knowledge and summarize it for them. So that's really important. And one of my favorite things in the world to do is have board members make thank you calls. Sometimes that's challenging, but that's something easy for them to do. And it really helps them understand part of the entire process. Attitude of gratitude, like, always show gratefulness, always show gratitude to your donors and your volunteers. And an attitude of abundance, which sometimes is really hard. But as I mentioned earlier, with some mission drift and some, it's okay to fire a donor or volunteer. There are people out there who care about your mission. Yes, you have to find them, but they're out there. So if somebody is not a good fit, that's okay. but there's this attitude of abundance. And we often will promote other partner organizations because they're doing something different than we are. And we want to showcase that. And we don't feel like that's a threat or taking away from our donors at all. And I think that's really important. I think donors appreciate that too, because it becomes an and proposition for them. It's not like I'm going to give to ICL or Advocates for the West. I'm going to give for both. Um, Value your donors and your volunteers. I've talked about that a little bit. Value yourself too, and ask for help when you need it. Burnout is real in this field. I hate to say it, but burnout is real. The average longevity of a development director in a nonprofit is 18 months. So that's across the sector or across all the nonprofit sector. And then just remember to make the ask, think big. You've got somebody who gives you $1,000, but they're giving the Nature Conservancy or some other organization $10,000. Ask them for $10,000 because they have that capacity. Tell them the story first, give them the why, educate them, and then be sure you don't keep asking them for that small amount when you know they can give a larger amount. Be nimble. Everything is changing so fast that you have to be able to be flexible. And if you start down a path and you're like, wow, that's not going to work, that's okay. You don't have to keep going down that path. And then, of course, be genuine and transparent in the work that you do. And then I've got, one more slide here. It's a list of resources that I will be sure, Bernie, you can let me know the best way to share this, but these are some really great resources for fundraising, help, tools, templates. You don't ever have to start a fundraising plan from scratch. There are millions out there. Don't ever have to start a cultivation plan from scratch. There are samples out there. And don't be afraid of AI. It can be a real help to you too in looking for templates and samples and all of that. So those are my prepared remarks. I will stop sharing and see if I can unraise my hand. Sorry about that.
Thank you so much, Jana. That was great. We can turn it over to a Q&A now. So if anyone has any questions, you can feel free to put it in the chat or just raise your hand and shout it out.
And I briefly wanted to mention that Deanna's resources will be added to our website, and I've included the link to our website, specifically the Student Affairs resource site, on the chat. So folks can access that as well.
Thanks, Bernie.
Yeah, I can go first with the question.
Go for it.
Yeah. Thank you, Diana. It was a great talk. My name is Purya, and I'm a PhD student now at Texas A&M. And I, like 2 years ago, I founded this nonprofit. It's actually incorporated in British Columbia, Canada. And it's called Wildlife Outreach and Conservation Society. And like we do outreach and like trying to promote coexistence. But now our focus is on immigrant communities. And like because like in North America, there's a lot of immigrants coming in, especially like in the Pacific Northwest. And in those areas, there's lots of like bears, coyotes. So there's conflict. And I'm like from an immigrant community, and I know like how the dynamics are. And so it's like my question is that like as a nonprofit who we just started, like we're like a baby. Like we have like couple of like 5, 6 people like volunteering. I do most of the work now. How can we start like fundraising? How can we start like getting donations and getting money? Yes.
That's such a great question. Thank you. And thank you for starting that organization. That's quite an undertaking. I think the best way to get started, well, there's a couple ways. So is since you're working with the immigrant communities, is get some of their stories about the conflict and what they're trying to solve. And maybe I'm going to use the word event rather loosely. When I say event, I don't mean like a gala. I mean, have a talk, a boots on the ground. We do a lot of science pubs, which, pub is controversial. Sometimes you're a coffee shop. But, we have these get-togethers and we get the word out, and the word can be out, via social media, via emails. We work with some local coffee shops or breweries or whatever, and they promote it too. So we get an audience way beyond us. And it can be frustrating when you're starting because you do have to start small to build that trust and build that education. And then the next one you reach out to all of those people who came to the first one and say, bring somebody, bring a friend, and have an ask for money at the end of every one and make it easy for people to donate. Have envelopes ready to go, or Venmo, if you have a Venmo, whatever you're using, so they can just click a couple buttons and make a donation to you. I think it's really important too, and this is something I should have talked when I sort of said when I talked about events, is the follow-up is just as important as getting people in the room. Like, be sure you reach out to all of those people, which can be time consuming, but it just like build it into that timeline now. I know it's so often in the nonprofit world, like we do one thing, we're like, okay, that's done, moving on to the next thing. But you need to be sure you build in that time block to do that follow-up, because that's so important. And then also working with any trusted partners. I don't know if there's other, with immigrants, if you have any other partners who are working with the immigrant population, but not necessarily in the sector you're in, that you could partner together. And that's where that attitude of abundance comes in. It's like, there's enough to support both organizations in the work you're doing to try to serve the same community. Was that helpful? To any other question?
Yeah, no, definitely was well, really helpful. I took some notes.
I have a quick question. I was just wondering if you're in a position of I'm in grad school, went back after maybe a decade of working in conservation and stewardship. I just wasn't really sure if you're trying to kind of work your way into fundraising and development, or at least kind of building that toolkit. But many jobs out there are often looking for experience in that realm. So it's the catch-22 of how do you get that experience before you actually get a job in it. So I wasn't sure if you had any recommendations as to how you might build that skill set, and if it's something as simple as maybe volunteering for a nonprofit in that capacity. I'm on, like, for example, the Conservation Commission for my town. So is it going after grants in a volunteer capacity in that way, and maybe showing that you can fundraise? Just be curious what your advice might be.
I think that's great. Volunteering is great. Also being on a board as well. Those are great ways to do it. Honestly, if somebody walked in my door right now and said, I want to volunteer fundraise for you, I would pick myself off the floor and give them a big hug, because that would be amazing. And be honest with why you're doing that. And there's always an exception. So I'm gonna say 98% of fundraisers would welcome you and be happy to mentor you in that process. There's also one of the resources that has the Association of Fundraising Professionals. They have, which I think as a student, they're pretty inexpensive to be a member of. As an individual or an organization, they get pretty pricey, but as a student, if that's still an option, I would suggest that, because they have these wonderful forums that you can be on and just ask all sorts of questions. And so it's not necessarily direct experience, but you might find nonprofits maybe not in your area who would be happy with some remote volunteer work for that as well. And then what state are you in?
I'm in Massachusetts.
Okay, I can't remember the name right now, but Massachusetts has a capacity building nonprofit. So like in Idaho, it's the Idaho Nonprofit Center. So it's a nonprofit that is set up to help build capacity for all other nonprofits. And they might be a really good resource for you too. I'm sorry, I don't know the name of it, but you could probably figure that out in a quick Google search. And often they will have volunteer opportunities. So it's a great way to network, and it's a great way to find other volunteer opportunities and find some also like professional development for fundraising.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Well, I have a question. Um, I was going to ask, this is partly just curiosity, but Deanna, can I ask what your kind of career path was like to getting to where you are?
Oh boy. I have a strange career
If you
path.
don't mind my asking that.
No, it's fine. It's just always weird because people are like, what? So I started out my life. I grew up in the mountain. I grew up in Montana, and I'm a mountain girl. And the environment's always been very important to me, but it took me a long time to get back to this. So I had a Navy ROTC scholarship to college, and I have I lovingly refer to them. You're all scientists, so you're going to love this. I lovingly refer to my BSs and BS. I have a BS in political science and a BS in geography with an emphasis on state and local government. So I was an intelligence officer in the Navy for a while. And when I resigned from the Navy on a lark, I got into the investment business. I could barely spell mutual fund, but I'm like, oh, that sounds interesting. And actually, I was living in Jacksonville, Florida when I got out, and I ended up taking a job in Philadelphia. And I thought, oh, it's going to be so much fun to live in a big city on the East Coast. Not so much for this mountain girl. Nothing against Philadelphia, but not so much for this mountain girl. But I ended up staying in various stages of the investment field for, gosh, almost 20 years. And as I kind of mentioned in my intro, I was helping people, like the term we use is gather assets. So whether people would gather assets for their retirement or pay for college for their kid or something like that, it's kind of a similar conversation you actually have to asking people to gather assets for the mission of the organization you're supporting. And then I got pretty disillusioned with that, actually. Y'all are pretty young, but I went through the tech bubble and the Enron fiasco where people were just, or these big organizations were just stealing money from people and destroying people's retirements and livelihoods. And JP Morgan lost $6 billion of their investors' assets and nobody blinked. I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I've been volunteering with nonprofits for a long time, but I just couldn't do that as a living anymore. So I'd moved to Idaho by that point. I'd lived a few other places in between Philadelphia and here. And I was fortunate. I was volunteering with the organization that introduced me to the Idaho Nonprofit Center, which is that nonprofit I mentioned that helps other nonprofits build capacity. So I worked there for a couple of years on a grant, and it was such a fun job because literally the first 2 months of my job was to interview every executive director who would talk to me in the state. So I learned a lot about nonprofits doing that, and still had that kind of asset gathering, I guess, background and mentality. So then I moved into culture is a big deal for me. So I actually went to a hands-on science center because the executive director there was an amazing human, and I wanted to work with her for a while. And then she left, and I went to another nonprofit because that executive director is an amazing human being. I knew I could learn a lot from her. So that's how I ended up doing this. Those were all fundraising positions. I've lived in Idaho 15 years now, to think about that. And the organization I work for now, ICL, was the first organization I ever volunteered with. So I've kind of been like plotting this to get to ICL through still volunteering, but going to other organizations until an opportunity here opened up for me. So it was a 10-year process, actually, to be able to get to this position where I am now. So that's a weird background. I'm on my third career.
No, that's so cool. I was just thinking one of the things we've been trying to emphasize through a lot of our career webinars is the sort of diversity of pathways that you can take in this field. So it's really cool to hear you share all that. That's super interesting.
Absolutely. And that's part of that. I think being nimble is like not just like being nimble to react to outside things, but like take that moment internally too to go like, I don't think what I'm doing right now is working for me. How do I translate these skills to something else? And I needed some coaching through that because that's a hard, I think, thing for people to do. And I totally understand, like in this environment right now that's going on in this country and spilling over into our friends in Canada. So,
yeah.
I think there's a lot of skills that maybe originally you don't think can translate, but they do.
Yeah, there's certainly a need to be nimble right now, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say there was a request to have your email in the chat. If you're willing to have people contact you.
Oh, yes.
Would you mind dropping that in there?
Absolutely. Sorry, I missed that.
Oh, that's all right. Any other questions or were your questions?
Because I have a question, speaking of about being nimble, in current times. So Deanna, one of the things that even SCBNA has been thinking a lot about is how do we adapt grant applications, requests for donations based on, new guidelines that have come out, especially with regards to new executive orders. I know there's a lot of that going on at the moment, so you might not have a concrete answer for this, but what are some resources that folks can tap into to kind of adapt their grant writing process to meet those new guidelines?
That is such a great question. So an organization that's been following all of the executive orders and how they're impacting nonprofits is the National Council for Nonprofits. Or it might be the National Conference or Council of Nonprofits. I'll have to Google that real quick. But they have been tracking this really closely. And I think it's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow. We don't get any federal grants, which I'm thrilled about at this moment in time. So I think going to that resource, and then I'm trying to think, the Society of Nonprofit Organizations, SNPO, has some really good resources too. I haven't looked specifically for this, but in the past, I've been able to go to them for some good resources for that. I'll think about this. If I think of anything else or come across something, I'll send it to you so you can add it to your other communications. But that's a really good question, but I do not have a good answer for it.
No, that's great. Thank you so much. Yes, I know that this is sort of an evolving thing, so any resources you can share would be amazing.
Yeah, and I understand his frustration because it's like, this is happening. Oh no, it's not. It gets rolled back and then it's back, and yeah, it's just really confusing. So yeah, hopefully the National Council will have some resources out there for you. And if anybody's wondering, that is Stanley Lake behind me in central Idaho.
Oh, that's beautiful. I was curious what that was.
It'll be interesting because that whole hill that's over my shoulder here, that all burned this summer. So
Oh,
the picture
wow.
was taken last summer. So it'll be interesting to see
Okay. Yeah.
what happens with all
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, that'll be interesting. Well, if there's no more questions, we're not far from our 1 hour mark as it is. We can wrap up a couple minutes early, or does anyone have any burning questions they didn't get to ask? All right. Well, in that case, Deanna, thank you very much for being here, and thanks to all of our audience for joining us today. This was really great, and I believe it'll be posted on YouTube in the next couple of days, I guess, if anybody wants to review the resources. And I think as Bernie mentioned, everything will be up on our website too. So
Thanks for your time, everyone. Appreciate it.
thanks again.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.